Next, let's address a few more things that can improve readability in our page and add more balance and vertical rhythm. Notice our page title here. So far it looks pretty good, and it definitely has an established role in the hierarchy as the main heading of our page. But notice how there are these line breaks happening at certain points when we reduce the browser width, like right here and right there. So let's fix this. We could simply adjust the font size in our media query to a smaller size. So this looks better when it's smaller, but there's still a line break that happens when the browser is at about 735 pixels wide. Well, we could add another media query to adjust things, but let's take a look at two other ways we can fix this and make our headings completely scalable. One way we can do this is by using one of the new viewport relative units, for example, 6.6 VW. Now, we thoroughly covered these in the values and units deep dive, but I'll quickly go over what they do. So VW doesn't stand for a punch buggy. It actually means viewport width, where 1 VW is equal to 1/100th or 1% of the width of the viewport. So here, the font size for the main title will always be 6.6% of our viewport width. But there are still a few issues when using these. Most notably, there is no support for these yet in Firefox at the time of this recording. And there's still a bug in Chrome where the font size doesn't exactly adjust according to the new viewport size when we resize it. We actually need to refresh the page in order for it to reload to the accurate font size, as we can see here. Now, there are some JavaScript workarounds for this, but this is just a bug that will most likely be rectified in a future release. But definitely keep these viewport relative units in mind, VW, VH, and VMin, because once they're ready for prime time with full browser support, we'll be able to do some really neat stuff with them, especially when building responsive layouts. A great solution for making our title scalable and flexible is a small jQuery plugin called FitText. FitText, as we can see here, can make our font sizes flexible, so it's a perfect solution for making our heading completely scalable. So I'll go ahead and download that, and I've included it in my project folder. Now, I won't be going into the specifics of jQuery here. You can actually check out Andrew Chalkley's awesome series on jQuery called Build an Interactive Website to learn jQuery. But for this example, don't worry if you're not familiar with jQuery, because we don't really need to know it to make this work. I'll show you what I mean. In our HTML file, I've already linked to jQuery from the Google API. So I'll just need to include the file that I downloaded from FitText here. I just linked to it. And next, I'll need to include the line of jQuery that selects our main title. So I'll just paste that in here. Notice how I'm using a separate ID of title and not the class name, because we should never mix functionality and presentation and selectors. It's best to keep those separate. So by default, this will resize our title to 1/10 of the containing element's width. But we can adjust this by passing an argument with a custom value. So I'll just go ahead and quickly paste those in. Now this will just make our heading a max font size of 72 pixels and a min font size of 46 pixels. So it doesn't get any smaller than that once our browser width is reduced. And the font size does not get any larger than 72 pixels. So now we'll save this and we'll refresh the browser, and let's try this out. There we go. Now our text is resized fluidly. Finally, we need to address one of the most important issues on this page, the line height. We need to establish a good vertical rhythm. Just like a line of text has a natural rhythm, the spacing between lines of text also creates a rhythm. And that rhythm is what can make a layout more balanced and beautiful, and its content more readable. Vertical rhythm is the balance of spacing and the arrangement of text as the user reads down the page. Each line of text has a baseline it sits on. If each line of text sits perfectly on the baseline, then you can say that it has a consistent vertical balance or rhythm. The concept of vertical rhythm does not only apply to paragraph text, it also applies to headings, subheadings, lists, images, and any group of text elements. It offers consistent, predictable line spacing as the user scrolls down the content. When we read, we use pattern recognitions. As we learned in the previous videos, we read word shapes or chunks of headings, paragraphs, and other elements. We don't fixate on every word and only focus on certain words, then fill in the rest through our pattern recognition of letters and words that have been stored in our minds in this sort of pattern memory bank. Now, the same happens with the spaces between lines of text. If a layout, for example, has a consistent line and paragraph spacing, we'll develop a pattern recognition for it after reading a few lines of text, because we'll identify other identical spaces as part of the same pattern. This is why structure in lines of text is important. If different spacing patterns are used on other elements, we'll have to stop and identify each space as a new pattern. The more shapes to analyze, the longer it will take for us to read because our brain would have to analyze the new individual spaces in order to understand their meaning. So this irregularity breaks the flow of our pattern recognition. Using a consistent baseline in which vertical space derives from a predetermined height can eliminate these inconsistencies. It also makes our jobs as designers easier because we can then base many structural decisions on our predetermined line space. The baseline is the invisible line that anchors a line of text. The distance between baselines is what creates vertical rhythm, when text elements or images adhere to it, because of the uniform repetition of baselines spaced apart according to the line spacing. Creating consistent baselines is really not that difficult. It just requires a little math and careful thinking. We'll also have to consider a few things up front. Currently, the line height of our page is set to the browser's default value, which is about 135% of the font size, or 24 pixels. So let's open it up a little more with a slightly larger line height value. But first, I'll use this neat tool you can grab at basehold.it to render a baseline overlay on our page. So we'll need to simply copy the link it provides here. Then I'll paste it in the head section of our page. So let's generate a baseline height of 29 pixels, which seems to be a generous height for our base font size of 18 pixels. So when we refresh, we see our baseline grid, and notice how the lines of text are not sitting on the baseline, but rather in between them, and things are actually looking kind of messy now that we've established a baseline height. So first, we'll need to add a line height to our text. So in our CSS file, in our body rule, we'll give it a line height of 1.62. So this sets our line height to about 29 pixels. So it's 1.62 times our 18 pixel font size. So next we'll go ahead and adjust a few margins and padding in our page. I'll start with a body. I'll change this to 2.95 em. Next, in our title rule, I'll give it a margin bottom 0.7 8M, and I'll change the line height to 1. I'll increase the top margin in our heading 2 here. And finally, our paragraph needs a little bit more top and bottom margins. So I'll just change that to 1.6M. We'll refresh this, and now everything sits nicely on the baselines. We could even add images, headings, and paragraphs, and it'll still maintain its proportions. So for example, let's go ahead and see what an image will do to our page layout. The rhythm is still there. And if, for example, the heading has a line break, say the heading was much longer, the text still maintains its rhythm. So now we can say that this page has vertical rhythm. It's not always going to be perfect, and it does take a little tinkering and poking around with numbers to make it just right. But again, don't worry if it isn't mathematically perfectly aligned. After all, it's more about achieving a balanced hierarchy and rhythm in our text. So the most important decisions are deciding on font sizes, line lengths, and line height. If we reduce our browser, all the widths maintain their proportions. And if we zoom out, we can see that the proportions are still there.
Next up, we'll get started with web fonts, how they work, where to get them, and what to consider when choosing one. See you then.